Time Lords out there are just as much under siege as we are.
What?
And they couldn't send anyone to help you. But they did summon up enough temporal energy to lift me out of my bit of our time stream and pop me down here.
A television legend was taken off the airwaves, not with a bang, but with a whisper. A moment of chilling emotional manipulation between the Doctor and his companion Ace proved to be the show's undoing. It was a scene that went too far, showcasing a darkness in the hero that viewers had never seen before and that the network could not ignore. This is the story of how a 2-minute clip, buried in a late-eighties episode, became the catalyst for canceling one of the most beloved shows in history. The truth is even more dramatic than the fiction. The cracks begin to show. For over 2 decades, Doctor Who was more than just a television show. It was a British institution, a cultural landmark woven into the very fabric of family life. You see, from its humble beginnings on a foggy November night in 1963, the series captured the imagination of a nation. It began as an educational program designed to teach children about history and science, but it quickly morphed into something far grander. The show's breakout stars weren't its heroes, but its villains. The Daleks, with their chilling cry of "exterminate," sparked a phenomenon known as Dalek Mania in the mid-60s. Toy stores couldn't keep them on the shelves, and playgrounds were filled with kids mimicking their robotic, hate-filled voices. This was a level of popularity that was, to put it mildly, unheard of for a BBC science fiction show. The 70s cemented the show's legendary status, with John Pertwee as the action hero Third Doctor, and most famously Tom Baker as the eccentric, scarf-wearing Fourth Doctor. The show reached its absolute zenith. At its peak, viewership numbers were staggering, often soaring past 15 million in the UK alone. That means more than 1 in 4 people in the entire country were tuning in every Saturday night to watch the Doctor battle Cybermen, Sontarans, and his arch-nemesis, the Master. The most shocking fact is that the show achieved this with a budget that would barely cover the catering on a modern Hollywood film. They used bubble wrap painted green for alien skin and converted old vacuum cleaner parts into props. And yet, you can see this everywhere in fan culture. The creativity born from these limitations is what gave the show its unique and enduring charm. But not all things are what they seem. As the show entered the 1980s, the golden age began to tarnish. The television landscape was changing. High-budget, slick American productions like Star Wars and Star Trek were raising audience expectations for special effects. Suddenly, Doctor Who's charming, low-budget aesthetic started to look, in the eyes of some, simply cheap. Behind the scenes at the BBC, a storm was brewing. A new generation of executives had taken charge, and many of them didn't share the public's affection for the aging Time Lord. The most prominent of these figures was Michael Grade, the controller of BBC One. Grade made no secret of his dislike for the show, publicly criticizing its production values and what he saw as tired, uninspired storylines. The thing nobody tells you is that this wasn't just a matter of opinion. It had real-world consequences. The show's budget was repeatedly slashed, and its broadcast time was moved to a weekday slot directly opposite the most popular show in the country, the soap opera Coronation Street. It was a programming decision that many saw as a deliberate attempt to sabotage the series. Then, in 1985, the unthinkable happened. The BBC announced that Doctor Who was being put on an 18-month hiatus. For the fiercely loyal fan base, this was a declaration of war. A charity single, Doctor in Distress, was released, protests were held, and the public outcry was immense. The show eventually returned, but it was wounded. The magic was fading, and the institutional support was gone. It was in this tense, hostile environment that the show entered its final years, with a new, mysterious Doctor at the helm, played by Sylvester McCoy. The creative team, knowing their days were numbered, decided to go for broke, crafting stories that were darker, more complex, and more psychologically daring than anything that had come before. They were taking risks, pushing the boundaries of what a family show could be. What many overlooked was that this new, bold direction was exactly what the show's enemies at the BBC were waiting for. They just needed one moment, one scene that went too far, to justify ending the show for good. they were about to get it. That final justification was closer than anyone could have ever imagined. When the hero became a monster. The 26th season of Doctor Who, aired in the fall of 1989, felt different. There was an end of an era quality to it, a sense that the creative team was throwing everything they had at the screen. The stories were layered with allegory and a deep, brooding atmosphere. The crown jewel of this season, and arguably of the entire Sylvester McCoy era, was a 4-part serial called The Curse of Fenric. Set at a British naval base during the height of World War II, the story was a complex tapestry of ancient Viking curses, vampiric creatures called hemovores, and a chess-playing supercomputer. At its heart was an ancient, formless evil known as Fenric, a being the Doctor had battled across the millennia. Many people are crazy about this particular story, citing it as a masterpiece of classic Who. The Doctor's companion at this time was Ace, a troubled but fiercely loyal teenager from the London suburbs. Played by Sophie Aldred, Ace was a departure from past companions. She was street smart, carried homemade explosives she called Nitro 9, and had a deeply cynical view of the world. Her one unwavering belief, her one source of stability in the universe, was her absolute, unconditional faith in the Doctor. He was her professor, her mentor, and the only person she truly trusted. The dynamic between the 7th Doctor and Ace was one of the most developed in the show's history. He was a master manipulator, a cosmic chess player moving pieces across the board, and she was his most powerful, if unknowing, pawn. You see, this Doctor was darker and more alien than his recent predecessors, often withholding crucial information and guiding events from the shadows. The Curse of Fenric brought this complex relationship to a shocking and brutal climax. The story reveals that Fenric can only be defeated if its pawns, its wolves, have their faith in it shattered. The ultimate wolf of Fenric, it turns out, is Ace herself. Her entire life had been manipulated by this ancient evil to bring her to this exact time and place. Fenric's power over her is maintained through her trust in others. To defeat the creature, the Doctor realizes he has to do the one thing that goes against his very nature. He has to destroy Ace's faith in him. This leads to the scene that became the show's unofficial death knell. In a cold, sterile laboratory, with the base under siege by hemovores, the Doctor confronts Ace. But there is no warmth, no reassurance. Instead, he turns on her with a chilling psychological cruelty. He calls her an emotional cripple, mocking her for trusting him so completely. He tells her he used her, that he knew all about her troubled past and her painful family history, and that he only brought her along because he found her amusing. He dismisses her loyalty and her friendship as a pathetic weakness. To put it mildly, it is a moment of pure emotional devastation. The look on Ace's face is one of utter heartbreak and betrayal. For a generation of viewers who grew up seeing the Doctor as a fundamentally kind and righteous hero, this was horrifying. He wasn't just defeating a monster, he was emotionally dismantling his best friend to do it. The most shocking fact is that it works. Ace's faith shatters, Fenric is weakened, and the Doctor saves the day. But the cost was immense. What many overlooked is that this wasn't just a plot point. It represented a fundamental shift in the show's morality. The hero had used emotional torment as a tool. For the executives at the BBC, who were already looking for any reason to cancel the series, this was the smoking gun. It was inappropriate, too dark, and not suitable for children. The backlash was quiet, but for the BBC, it was all the proof they needed. How the BBC buried a legend. The broadcast of The Curse of Fenric didn't cause a massive public firestorm. There were no front-page newspaper headlines or primetime news debates. The thing nobody tells you is that the end of Doctor Who wasn't a loud, dramatic explosion. It was a quiet, internal execution. The damage was done not in the court of public opinion, but in the corridors of power at the BBC. The complaints that did come in were from a vocal minority of parents and longtime viewers who felt the show had lost its way. They wrote to the BBC expressing their concern that the series had become too frightening and psychologically intense for its traditional family audience. The scene where the Doctor berated Ace was singled out as a prime example of this new, unwelcome darkness. You see, for 26 years, the Doctor had been a figure of hope and morality. He was the hero who outsmarted the monsters, who stood up for the little guy, and who, above all, was kind. Even when he was grumpy like the first Doctor or arrogant like the sixth, there was an underlying goodness. The seventh Doctor's calculated cruelty towards Ace felt like a betrayal of that core principle. In the eyes of the BBC executives, it was a creative decision that confirmed all of their prejudices against the show. Michael Grade and his allies had long argued that the program was out of touch and had become self-indulgent. Now they could point to a specific scene and say, "See? This is what we're talking about." It was no longer about wobbly sets or unconvincing rubber monsters. It was about the show's fundamental tone and character. Many people are crazy about the idea that this one scene single-handedly ended the show, but the reality is more complex. The show's fate was likely already sealed. The ratings were low, hovering around 4 million viewers, a far cry from the glory days. The production team was working with a shoestring budget, and the lack of support from the network was palpable. What the scene did was provide the final, undeniable justification for the cancellation. It allowed the executives to frame their decision not as a cynical act of corporate sabotage, but as a responsible choice to protect the audience from a show that had gone too far. It was the perfect excuse. Just a few weeks after The Curse of Fenric aired, on the show's 26th anniversary, the BBC announced that Doctor Who would not be commissioned for a 27th season. They never officially used the word cancelled. The official line was that it was being rested, put on an indefinite hiatus. But everyone involved knew what it meant. The TARDIS had made its final journey, at least for the foreseeable future. The most shocking fact is that there was no grand finale, no epic send-off. The final episode of the classic run, Survival, ended with the Doctor and Ace walking off into the distance, followed by a poignant, specially recorded monologue from Sylvester McCoy, assuring viewers that the story continues. It was a hopeful message, but for fans, it felt like a funeral. The show that had defined British science fiction for a generation was gone, taken off the air not by Daleks or Cybermen, but by a boardroom decision fueled by years of neglect, and sealed by a single, unforgettable moment of cruelty. But was this truly the end, or just a long, deep sleep for the Time Lord? How the fans kept the TARDIS alive. With the show off the airwaves, Doctor Who entered what fans now call the wilderness years. For the first time since 1963, there were no new episodes to look forward to. The TARDIS was dark. But the thing nobody tells you is that while the show was gone from television, it was more alive than ever in other forms. The fans, the true custodians of the series, refused to let it fade away. A massive new market for original Doctor Who novels exploded, with a publishing line called The New Adventures, continuing the story of the Seventh Doctor and Ace right where the show left off. These books were often more adult and ambitious than the TV series had ever been, and they kept the narrative alive for a whole new generation of fans. Then came the audio dramas. A company called Big Finish Productions began producing high-quality, full-cast audio plays starring the original actors. Tom Baker, Peter Davison, Colin Baker, and Sylvester McCoy all returned to voice their Doctors, creating hundreds of new stories that are now considered an essential part of the Doctor Who canon. You see, the show wasn't just surviving, it was thriving in the shadows, kept alive by the passion of its cast, creators, and audience. What many overlooked was that this period of hibernation allowed the franchise to grow and mature in ways it never could have under the constant pressure of television production. In 1996, there was a glimmer of hope for a full return. A one-off television movie, co-produced by the BBC and the American network Fox, was broadcast. It starred Paul McGann as a new romantic Eighth Doctor and was an attempt to relaunch the series for an international audience. While the movie was a ratings hit in the UK, it failed to capture the American market, and the planned new series was scrapped. To put it mildly, it was another crushing disappointment for fans. The show came back stronger than ever, proving that some legends can't be kept down. But was the BBC right to pull the plug when they did? Like the video and subscribe for more.